Hello everybody and welcome back to Nerf This Patch. I'm glad to have you on. We're really close to getting 100 subscribers. That's hopefully the goal by the end of the year, and I'm really excited to keep making these videos and have people so interested in watching them. I've been playing a little bit here and there, but I hurt my hand in football, so it's been hard to really get into some gaming time, but hopefully by next week my hand will be ready to go so I can grip that controller the right way. Alright, but let's get right into it. So let me start with this. In most things in life, having the best start doesn't matter in almost anything. So if you're running a marathon and you ran the first mile faster than everyone else, but you didn't really do the last 25, does it really matter how fast you did that first mile? Does it matter if your sports team, if they had the best start and they lose the rest of the year? Like, does that ever really matter? No. How you start doesn't matter. How you finish usually does, or how consistent can you be throughout. And I want to talk about the console launch lineups. I remember when I was at GameStop, I had somebody who worked under me, and he's like, well, PS4 or Xbox One, I'm just going to get the Xbox One because the launch lineup's better. And I was kind of confused because I was like, that doesn't matter. The console lineups never matter. And what I mean by that is, if you're judging a console based on the first 5 or 7 games that are out on it, I don't think you should be buying a console. I think there are games that matter on a launch lineup. I'll get into that later. The top 10 best launch games ever for any console. But the lineup itself is kind of irrelevant. You know that Sony has barely had any great games in their launch lineup, and all 4 of their consoles sell exponentially well, and they do very well moving from the beginning moving forward. It doesn't matter how you start. If you're a PS5, Xbox Series X waiting back, and you're judging this based on the games that are immediately out now, day one, you shouldn't be buying a console. It never, ever, ever matters who has a better launch lineup at start. Now, there are some games that come out that are unbelievably valuable, and you have to have them day one. And you know what? To that credit, sure. But the lineup itself, comparing the two, doesn't make any sense. Like, you know what you're getting with Nintendo. You know that you're going to get a couple Mario games, you're going to get a couple Zelda games, you're going to get a bunch of weird Nintendo games that will be pretty good, and they'll surprise you with a few others here and there. But does it really matter that the Wii U didn't have those games at launch? No. The Wii U had a bunch of games after that, and unfortunately the console itself kind of sucked, but the game library was great. The launch lineup was not going to be the indicator of that. Even with the Switch, outside of Breath of the Wild, like, most of the launch games kind of suck. It doesn't matter. And most consoles, they either, like, let's take the PS2. The PS2 is one of the worst launch lineups ever. It's the best-selling console ever. It doesn't matter. If you are judging a console based on its launch lineup, you shouldn't be buying a console. You shouldn't. You need to wait and see what happens. And I think that's one of the best parts about buying a console this gen, because you know what to expect. You know what you're getting if you buy a Switch. You know what you're getting if you buy a PS5. You kind of know what you're getting with an Xbox Series X, because we don't know how these studios are going to go moving forward, if they're going to be more exclusive or not. But you know that if you have a PC, you should be fine. It's just, I always think back to that time at GameStop where someone decided to buy the Xbox because it had a better launch lineup. And, time showed that that was the wrong move. They eventually ended up selling that for a PS4. You shouldn't be surprised about that. And vice versa. The Xbox 360. I remember when the 360 and the PS3 first came out, I waited 2 years because I wasn't sure. I wasn't going to judge it based on the launch lineup because that doesn't make any sense. I waited to see what would happen, and if I would have judged on the launch, I would have got a PS3. And I'm so glad I didn't, because 2007, Halo 3, BioShock, Mass Effect, 2008, Gears of War 2, Left 4 Dead 2, Final Fantasy 13 was ported, Devil May Cry was ported, Grand Theft Auto. Like, clearly I made the right choice waiting and getting a 360. But if I would have bought it based because the launch lineup on the PS3 was better, that's insane. Why would you do that? By now you know what to expect. You know that Sony is going to deliver amazing single-player AAA games. You know that Microsoft is going to have the best accessibility. And you know that Nintendo is going to be Nintendo. But if you're waiting based on, do I want to play Sackboy or Demons? Like, let's be honest, there are far more games available on the Xbox Series X that there will be than the PS5 at launch. Does it matter? I would argue no. What matters is, in 2 years from now, how many exclusives and how many Game of the Year nominees are you going to have? And I know for a fact that Sony's going to have a bunch of Game of the Year nominees moving forward, and they're going to have games that are going to push the industry forward. Nintendo, the same thing. Do I really care about their new Pro console? Is it backwards compatible? That's enough for me. I know that the games will come later. It's Microsoft is the one I'm the most skeptical about. PS5 is the one that I'm most, disappointed with so far. And Nintendo, this is how all their consoles go. There's a dry spell in the middle, and then eventually the games will come back out. How you start doesn't matter. It's how consistent you are, or more importantly, how you finish. How you start doesn't matter. So again, if you think that this console lineup or purchasing a launch matters because of the first available games out, like it did for PS4 and Xbox One, please do us all a favor. Don't buy a console. You're just gonna regret it later. So, on that note, we should talk about launch games because I think that even though I don't think the lineups are that important, I do think there are some games that set the tone very well for what to expect moving forward. And there are some games that are launch types that is kind of amazing. You have no experience with this new hardware, and you put out some of the greatest games ever made. And when I build this list, I actually decided that I was going to make a couple rules here. So let's go over the rules real quick. Number one, we're ranking the individual games, not the launch lineup of the console. And the reason why is because there's too many bad ones. There are so many. Like I said before, the PS1, 2, 3, and 4's total lineup is garbage. Most good launches really only have one good game and then a few okay ones. So there's no point in ranking those because they're all going to be about the same. And those individual games are the only ones that are going to matter anyway, so let's not bother. Number two, I don't really like ports. I don't like if it's available on other consoles unless it is like the definitive version of that game. And you'll see what I mean later on. I don't want to pick multiple games per console. If there's one game that came out, if there are two great games that came out, I'm picking the best one because two games can't really define a console at launch. One game is usually the front runner. And finally, I want to talk about what this game did for gaming's future as a whole. So it comes down to how impactful that game was, how it was able to move gaming forward, and is it still fun to play today? And that is always the key with games in their legacy. How important a game, how masterfully built a game is if can you play it 20 years from now. It's why I love the Super Nintendo so much because all of those games are just as good, and that's why I really don't like a lot of N64 games as much because they're worse with time. But let's get right into it. Number 10. On my poor Vita, the console I had a funeral for. Uncharted Golden Abyss was the launch title, and it's kind of incredible how that game ran on the Vita. I think the Vita came out like 2011, 2012? I think it was 2011. And at the time, it was one of the best looking games on a handheld we'd ever seen. It controlled so well. It was a full Uncharted game. Story was whatever, but man, this just showed everything that the Vita had potentially, and it's so sad that Sony gave up on this handheld because I loved my Vita. And I bought it, for this game and for Persona. So I have a lot of fun with this game. One of my favorites. Number 9, Geometry Wars on the Xbox 360 Marketplace. So a lot of people don't remember that downloading games on a console back in the day wasn't really popular until the 360 nailed the marketplace and they nailed the currency. And this was one of the first games on the marketplace, Geometry Wars. It was originally a mini game in Project Gotham Racing 3. I think I got that right. And it was so popular that they made it a standalone, and then they, made 3 sequels for it. Really, really fun game. It really was the turning point of digital marketplaces for video games, and give the game credit. It did a really good job for 2005 for that marketplace. So man, the 360 was so great. I love the 360. Number 8 is Lumines for the PSP. This didn't really do the effect that Tetris had on the Game Boy, but this is a really good puzzle game, and it was so fun. The PSP is one of those love-hate consoles. I think there are a lot of great games on it, and there are a lot more bad ones. And the same with the Vita, very revolutionary for its graphics. But this game is up here strictly for the replayability, and because it was one of the best puzzle rhythm games ever made. It still holds up. There's a reason why they remade it last year. It's one of the best games I've played in a long time, and it was a great way to launch the PSP. Instead of this game, though, I remember I could have picked this game or Hot Shots Golf, and I picked Hot Shots Golf, which I still loved, but I would have rather had this, looking back. Excellent game. So. Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast. Now, I said I don't really like ports, but everybody knows that this is the definitive version of the original Soul Calibur, and I love the Dreamcast for fighters. I think, you know, the Dreamcast may be the best console for fighters we've ever had, and this was, you know, the showcase, one of the best looking games of the time. Soul Calibur is such an underrated game. I don't like where the direction of that franchise has gone, but the first Soul Calibur just nailed it. The Dreamcast was such an underrated console, and the Dreamcast has a lot of the better arcade ports, like Crazy Taxi, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom and Third Striker on here. There's a reason that people still buy Dreamcasts to play old fighting games like Soul Calibur. It was just perfect on this console. Yeah, and this game's amazing. Loved it. Wii Sports on the Wii. I don't know anybody who didn't fall into this craze, myself included. The only reason this isn't higher is because the game itself is just okay. And the way that it pushed motion controls and the way that motion controls died, you would argue that it didn't really move gaming forward. It just kind of pivoted it until it came back. But you can't deny that this game's important. One of the best-selling games of all time. It made the Wii a household name in every home. You know, the accessibility was there. People who didn't give a fuck about anything to do with video games, they were into Wii Sports. I don't know another game that is paired as well as, you know, a console and a game like intertwined than Wii Sports was. I don't know if you played video games at any point in your life, you played Wii Sports. So this game deserves all the credit in the world for how revolutionary it was. But number 6, because it didn't really the novelty definitely wore off after a couple of years. So Breath of the Wild. Okay, some people argue this is one of the best games ever made, and I'm not arguing that, but there's two things that keep this away from the top spot. Number 1, the open world, you know, aspect of this game had been done before, and while Nintendo nailed it, this wasn't as revolutionary as people think it was. The Switch console itself was pretty revolutionary, but the game itself is just an excellent game. Number 2, it's technically on Wii U, and I know that shouldn't hurt it, but it launched, like, if you didn't buy a Switch, you had an opportunity to play it on Wii U, and I know that's a weird thing to knock it for. It still deserves to be this high up on the list. When the Switch came out, I was nothing but skeptical. I did not think this game was going to be as good as it looked. I thought the Switch was going to bomb just like the Wii U, and this was the game that's like, nope, you are dead fucking wrong. This is going to be one of the best consoles we ever see, and this is going to be one of the best games you'll ever play, and God, I was so glad I was wrong. I mean, you can ask anybody who was with me at launch that I was just bitching a storm about how much I was not going to play this game on Switch, and man, they proved me wrong really well on that. So Tetris on the Game Boy. Now, again, this is kind of a port because it was on NES. This game technically came out in 1984, and the Game Boy version came out in 1989. But like the Wii and Wii Sports, like this game pushed the Game Boy to heights that it would have never reached without it. The pairing of these two, just perfect. Again, this came back to people who didn't give a shit about video games. Now all of a sudden we're obsessed. The Game Boy, oh man, the pairing of these two. I'm a loss for words. It's so obvious how important Tetris was. I would argue Tetris is the greatest video game ever made, or at least top 3. And the pairing with the Game Boy, like, made both of them even better. I don't think people played as much on the NES as they did on the Game Boy, but man, I have a loss for words on this one. That's just how great a pairing these two were. So let's move on. Mario 64 is maybe the greatest 3D game ever made. I think that, 3D games, all of them, had this as the template for how to do it right. I think the only thing holding it back a little bit is that the N64, outside of this game and Ocarina of Time, didn't really elevate gaming as much as it could have, because I think that the N64 might be the most overrated console ever. But that shouldn't take away with how great this game is. The way that you navigate 3D space in Super Mario 64 is still perfect. There's a reason why if you own the version on the Switch, it's timeless. Everybody complains about the camera, and I do think the camera is, whatever, but this game is as perfect as time is ever going to let it be. And also the next two games are just so good. So good and so important. This is like a 1A, 1B. Mario 64, again, maybe a top 10 all-time greatest game. It was really hard to not put this at number 1, but I think the next two games are slightly more important for gaming. Halo. Now, I don't think Mario 64 is worse than Halo, but I think Halo is more important for video games. Let me just be clear, I hate the original Xbox, but I wanted one just for Halo. I ended up playing Halo on PC, which is weird, but anyway. Halo made the Xbox brand. Halo is still the Xbox brand. I don't care that Halo 5's garbage. People own an Xbox, they love Halo. That's one of the biggest reasons why they own Xbox is to play Halo. And when this came out, you know, they had 4-player multiplayer on a shooter that was really the first of its kind. GoldenEye is not a good game. It's not. It hasn't held up as well. Halo 1 still holds up just as well as any other shooter, you know, from 2007 on. Like, this game came out in 2001. It's still perfect. It even ushered in Xbox Live later down the road. Now, I know it didn't launch with Xbox Live, but because of games like this, it ushered in online gaming for consoles. I know it existed for PC before, but this was the front runner. I don't know of any other, you know, console franchise that pairs as well. Wii Sports made the Wii what it is, but Halo made the entire Xbox brand what it was. And it all started here. There are so many reasons why this game shouldn't be as good as it is, and it's one. This is easily a top 5 all-time greatest game and one of the most important. And it was a hard argument to not put this number 1, but man, number 1 though is just so obvious. This game saved gaming, period. People don't realize that back in the 80s when that crash happened, that, you know, the NES came out from the ashes and saved gaming. Otherwise, gaming was going to be dead, essentially. And Super Mario Brothers saved it. Super Mario Brothers is the most important game ever made. Again, outside of Tetris, this may be the best video game ever made. So many secrets, so many things that like developers still can't copy. They can't do platforming as well as the original Super Mario Brothers. This little game from 1985 is gaming. This is the perfect game. If you have one game in a capsule for the rest of the time, and the world can only own one video game, it would be Super Mario Brothers for NES. This game will hold the test of time forever. There's a reason why we still rave about speedruns on this game in like half a millisecond better times. It's a perfect game. It is a perfect video game. It was the perfect game for its time. It saved gaming from, you know, the brink of destruction, and it is easily the number 1 best launch game ever made. Oop, almost went off there. Thank you guys so much for watching again. I know I rambled a lot on this one. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, but I still like the list. I still like where the PS5 is going and the Xbox Series X. I know I talked last week, I'm a little skeptical, but you know, I've done some more research. I feel like that backwards compatibility is really going to help. I would like to see what Sony's going to do with external storage. I would love to not have to worry about managing 800 gigabytes on my PS5 that I plan on putting a bunch of PS4 games on. But you know, we'll see what happens. We're about 3 weeks away. You know, next week's Halloween, so I would love to talk, you know, horror games, and I have a couple guests that I want to share some quotes with. But no, overall, I think this was a good time. So thank you guys so much again, and as always, keep on gaming.